What if the Roman Empire never fell? What kind of Europe would exist today if the legions never abandoned their roads, if the aqueducts never dried up, if Rome remained not a memory, but a living power? And would such a world be freer than ours, or far more tightly controlled?
Imagine a Europe where the year 476 CE passed almost unnoticed, where no dramatic collapse marked the end of an era, because the era never truly ended. In this world, the Roman Empire came terrifyingly close to destruction, but survived by doing what it had always done best: adapting. Corruption was curbed not by moral awakening, but by necessity. Imperial power was redistributed away from unstable emperors toward institutions that could endure, and the idea of citizenship expanded faster than ever before. The Roman eagle bent under pressure, but it did not break, and because of that single difference, the entire course of European history changed. There were no dark ages, no centuries of fragmentation, no sudden plunge into chaos. Roads continued to be repaired, cities continued to breathe, trade continued to flow, and memory was never severed. Europe grew up without forgetting who it was.
This surviving Rome did not remain frozen in marble. It decentralized, granting provinces real autonomy while binding them together through law rather than fear. Regional senates governed Gaul, Hispania, Britannia, the Germanic frontier, and the Balkans, all connected to a federal imperial council that met alternately in Rome and Constantinople. Emperors still existed, but they ruled like constitutional monarchs, constrained by law, precedent, and bureaucracy. Latin remained the administrative language, yet local tongues were no longer suppressed. Instead of being erased, they were written down, standardized, and taught. Early French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian emerged naturally inside the empire, while Germanic languages survived and evolved under Roman administration rather than in opposition to it. The word barbarian slowly vanished because the Goths, Franks, and Saxons were no longer outsiders. They served in the legions, governed provinces, married into Roman families, and called themselves Roman without irony.
Because Rome endured, Europe never experienced a true intellectual collapse. Knowledge was not locked away in monasteries waiting to be rediscovered centuries later. It remained part of daily civic life. Literacy stayed widespread, especially in cities, where public schools taught reading, arithmetic, law, and engineering. Aristotle was debated continuously rather than resurrected wildly. Galen's medicine was tested and improved rather than copied blindly, and Roman concrete was refined instead of forgotten. Watermills and windmills spread early, optimized by imperial engineers who valued efficiency over tradition. By the 9th century, printing appeared first as a bureaucratic tool to standardize laws and records, then as a medium for philosophy, science, and literature. The scientific method did not arrive as a revolution. It emerged gradually from Roman pragmatism, driven by a simple question Rome had always asked: what works? By the year 1200, this Europe possessed astronomical knowledge rivaling our 17th century, medical understanding approaching our 18th, and infrastructure resembling our 19th.
By all and every account, Christianity still became dominant, but without the political vacuum that, in our history, transformed the church into a substitute state. The empire remained strong enough to balance religious power, so bishops never replaced governors, and doctrine was settled through imperial councils enforced by law rather than endless schisms. There was no great schism between East and West, no permanent fracture between Rome and Constantinople. Pagan traditions were not violently erased either. Roman pragmatism absorbed them, reinterpreting local gods as saints and transforming festivals rather than destroying them. Europe became deeply religious, but less fanatical, more ritualistic than apocalyptic. The Crusades, as we know them, never happened because there was no fractured Christendom desperate for unity through holy war. Relations with the Islamic world were competitive but diplomatic, defined by trade, scholarship, and rivalry rather than existential hatred. Baghdad, Alexandria, and Rome became intellectual competitors, not mortal enemies.
One of the most striking differences in this world is the absence of feudalism. Without the collapse of central authority, land was never fragmented into hereditary warlord territories, and serfdom never became the foundation of society. Farmers were tenants or citizens, not bound souls, and private warfare between nobles never became normalized. There were no medieval kings ruling by divine right, no castles dominating starving villages, no centuries of petty conflict. Instead, Europe developed a culture of law astonishingly early. Courts functioned continuously from Roman times onward. Legal precedent stretched back a millennium. Contracts were sacred, and even the emperor was subject to the law. Rebellions still occurred, but it looked more like constitutional crisis than civil war. When people protested, they marched on administrative centers rather than battlefields.
By the year 1500 in this timeline, Europe already resembled our industrial age. Steam power was known and experimented with. Gunpowder existed, but was tightly regulated by the state, and ocean-going ships explored Africa and the Americas centuries earlier than in our world. Colonization still occurred, but it was slower, more bureaucratic, and less genocidal, because Rome viewed new lands as not empty prizes to be seized, but as provinces to be integrated. Indigenous elites were educated in Latin, local laws were codified, and slavery, already declining under Christian and Stoic influence, was abolished empire-wide by the 10th century. The Atlantic world became Roman, not through annihilation, but through administration, a system no less imperial, but less catastrophically destructive than our own history.
Yet this world was not a utopia. An empire that never falls is an empire that never forgets. Surveillance emerged early through detailed censuses and travel documentation. Taxes were efficient and unavoidable. Innovation was encouraged but regulated, always filtered through bureaucracy. There were no sudden explosions of radical freedom like the French Revolution, because there was never enough chaos to demand one. Individualism existed, but it grew slowly, carefully constrained by civic duty. Poets complained that life was too orderly, philosophers argued that Europe had traded passion for stability, and rebels claimed that Rome had smothered the soul of the continent beneath laws, stone, and memory. Perhaps they were right.
In the present day, this Roman Europe stretches from Scotland to Syria, from Portugal to the Black Sea. Its capital is symbolic rather than absolute, with Rome, Constantinople, and Alexandria sharing power through a rotating imperial council. It no longer calls itself an empire at all, but the Commonwealth of Provinces. There are elections, rights, and limits. Latin survives not as a dead language, but as a shared civic tongue, alongside hundreds of local languages. There are no nation-states as we know them, no France, no Germany, no Italy. There is only Europe, united not by flags, but by 2,000 years of uninterrupted memory. And carved into the marble of an ancient forum still in use is a sentence that defines this world and questions ours. Roma mutat, sed non cadit.